Hamish Campbell from Vision on TV. I'm at a talk by the NUJ introducing their new media branch in London, and we've got Paul Lewis here. And actually, he did a talk about Twitter and the riots, and it completely echoed with me, because it was the workflow we were using in 2001 in Genoa, and there's a big feature film coming out about this. Why does it take 10 years for traditional media to learn these workflows?
Well, I think the kind of dichotomy between traditional media and other forms of media doesn't really hold water. I mean, I think we are all media. I mean, it feels actually like a description from 2001, where you have this kind of idea of traditional corporate media and non-mainstream media. I mean, the whole picture is far more complicated nowadays. And I think all of us collectively have sought to exploit different technologies as they've come on board. And you mentioned Genoa. I think indie media was actually crucial in pushing a lot of these advancements forward. Now, essentially, you had a blank canvas where you had, I guess, at an embryonic stage, an idea of kind of crowdsourcing as well, and where kind of news reporting was happening by citizens or people who, to put it more accurately, weren't paid journalists. I mean, they were journalists, they were doing journalism, but they weren't maybe paid by news organisations. So I think it was a really interesting moment. But I don't think you can kind of cut it off from what's happening now, and I think we all learn from each other, actually. I mean, if you look at the development of the concept of the live blog, I mean, lots of people have contributed to that, and mainstream news organisations like my own, if you want to use that term, but big media organisations.
We call them traditional media.
Well, you can call them traditional news organisations that try to make a profit but don't, actually make losses. At the moment, let's hope that doesn't carry on forever. Have been, I think, as involved in innovating in this area as other people have been.
But there's this gap between what your workflow you described, covering that riot, was what people were doing in 2001 with the Indie Media Network. So there's a 10-year gap, and it's surprisingly it took 10 years for this workflow to reach traditional media.
Well, I don't think that's quite as it happened. I don't think Indie Media did something in 2001. And we were just dormant for 10 years, and then in 2012 we woke up in the riots and we were learning from what happened in 2001. I'm not sure that argument. I
don't think there's a connection between the two. I'm just surprised how long it took.
Yeah, no. I think what happened was there were technology changes, actually, and what Indie Media was doing in 2001. There's an argument which is basically posting news reports online.
User-generated posts, anyway, open posting,
yeah, exactly.
Which is basically
user-generated reports online. I think lots of news organisations started copying onto this. I mean, YouTube was the crucial advancement. I mean, that was a real moment. But the Guardian, when I joined the Guardian in 2005, I think it was dipping its toe in the water and beginning to do these types of things. I mean, ultimately, what makes news organisations adapt, and what makes journalists work in the way that they work, is news stories. I mean, that's the currency by which we kind of live and die with. So if you can get good news stories through using these kind of new technologies, and you can advance news stories, and you can tell stories better, quicker, faster, more effectively by collaborating with people, then why wouldn't you? And I think we've all learned a lot from the past. I mean, I do think the one thing I think is quite interesting about indie media, and I'm fascinated by indie media, I think it's really useful. I think it was a real moment in journalism, actually. I think you can reflect it in Twitter, which is the early adopters are often political activists. And they use it partly for kind of news dissemination, but also what you might call propaganda, what you might call making polemical cases, which is fair enough. But often political activists are the first people to take a technology and to drive it forward, and everybody else subsequently catches up. Now, I think
there's a 10-year gap. It seems a bit embarrassing.
I don't buy this kind of 10-year gap argument. I mean, we've been using. I mean, the Guardian was actually probably one of the first news organisations in the country.
It is a good progressive organisation, but it is trying to be contemporary media, I agree, and it's doing a reasonable job.
I don't think there was a gap between 2001 and 2012 when nothing happened. And I think there's a kind of symbiotic relationship. I think we're all learning from each other constantly. And actually, there are many other news organisations like The Guardian which were so quick to say, we're going to link to content outside of our news organisation. We want to work with as many people as we can. I think I don't see it as, a 10-year period where nothing happened. I think actually something developed over time, lots of news organisations and non-paid journalists or citizens were working simultaneously and with each other. And if there's one point, I think we can argue about whether there was or wasn't and who learnt from who and all that kind of stuff, and it becomes slightly petty, because what really matters, I think, is the news stories itself and the kind of investigation and trying to find out stuff that people don't want you to know. And so if you drop all the rest of it, that's what's most exciting about where we're at now, is that you have, yes, unfortunately, fewer and fewer paid journalists, that's the bad thing, but conversely, more and more people doing journalism. And essentially that's good for all of us.
Okay, so if people want to do citizen journalism, where would you say they should find out more information? How should they get involved in citizen journalism?
Well, very good question. I mean, it depends what they're interested in, first of all. Most of the investigations that I work on personally, I'll always try to involve people, and I think that goes for The Guardian itself more and more. We look at the open news hashtag on Twitter to see the types of investigations that we're opening up to people. But I think people should follow their own noses, actually, what they find interesting. Often stuff doesn't quite smell right, and it tends to be for a reason. And whereas before, the only people who had the kind of tools to really dig would be journalists, now actually lots of people can do it, and sometimes better than journalists, and sometimes there are people who are experts in their field who will know more than specialist journalists in their field, and to have those people doing journalism will be to the advantage of everyone.
Briefly, Guardian business model?
Well, if I was the editor of The Guardian, I would try to answer that in some way. Thankfully I'm not, so I don't have to. Thank you very much.
Right. Okay, we love The Guardian, it's a good institution, and it's nice that there's competent journalists involved with it. Find out more at the Guardian website or at Vision on TV. Hamish Campbell reporting.